My name is Emily. Until a few weeks ago, my life felt ordinary in the quiet, heavy way that ordinary lives do. A steady job, a husband I trusted, a small circle of family that called on Sundays and celebrated holidays together. We didn't have kids of our own yet, and honestly, I thought that gave us the luxury of breathing room, time to travel, save, plan. Then Lily walked into our living room with a diaper bag and a rattle and turned the whole thing sideways. Lily was supposed to be Jason's niece. Mia, Jason's younger sister, had adopted her, or that's the story everyone told me. Mia had always been the kind of person who spoke about being a single mother, like it was a plan she'd written in a notebook. Adoption paperwork, support networks, the apartment over the bakery she loved. When her best friend couldn't raise the baby, Mia stepped in. The family rallied. No one asked too many questions because who wants to poke at a story that ends with a baby being loved? 2.5 years ago, Mia's life changed. She was diagnosed with aggressive MS, the kind that doesn't leave time for gentle transitions. It was sudden and cruel, a downhill slide from independent woman to someone who needed help getting out of bed. She told us she wanted Lily to be safe no matter what. She asked us, really asked, with that trembling, determined look, to take Lily if she ever couldn't. Jason and I agreed. We didn't have children yet. It felt like doing the right thing. We said things like, family steps up, like it was a slogan rather than a life decision. Lily shifted the center of our small world in the best possible way. She slid into the rhythms of our home with the quiet confidence of very small people who have no idea about the adults' complicated rules. She called me Emily, the same way she called everyone else by name, but she also curled into my lap and slept like she belonged there. Mia visited when she could, smaller, softer, grateful until gratitude looked like guilt, and I promised her, aloud and fiercely, that Lily would be taken care of. I meant it then. I still mean it now, in a way that's separate from everything that followed. What I didn't know was that the story I was buying into was only as solid as the people who told it. Secrets have a way of pretending to be loyalty, and everyone in our family had been trained to look past the bad parts because the rest of the story was more comfortable. No one wants to be the person who asks embarrassing questions about paternity or old hookups. No one wants to drag someone's illness through the mud, so we all nodded and signed paperwork and learned to bake cupcakes for birthdays and ignored the small details that should have been obvious. Jason was gentle with Lily like an uncle should be. He played peekaboo, he read the same board book until both of their eyes were glassy, he carried her around like a man who was proud to be part of something. He never, at least not in a way that drew attention, behaved like a man who was hiding something this enormous. There's a kind of intimacy in raising a child that doesn't belong to you. It requires distance and boundaries, and he held that boundary with the casual ease of someone who already knew the lines. I assumed that was what made him dependable. The truth is, if a secret is going to survive for long, it needs a sympathetic accomplice and an explanation that people are willing to accept Mia's illness provided both. Her fear of dying with a secret was persuasive. Our family's desire to protect her and the baby was persuasive. My own hunger to be helpful, my pride at being the person who could step in and fix things, was persuasive. All of it added up to a reality in which none of us asked the simplest questions. If someone had told me then that the baby I was kissing goodnight was the product of my husband's night before our wedding, that revelation would have sounded like fiction. It would have been a plot twist too cruel to believe. But secrets, I was about to learn, are dishonest, not because they are complicated, but because they are simple. They hinge on what we refuse to ask out loud. Mia asked me to come over on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of bleak, cloud-heavy day that already feels like a warning. She'd been having more bad days lately, more stumbles, more tremors, more moments when her mind wandered. But when she opened the door, what struck me wasn't her illness. It was the look in her eyes. She looked like someone who had rehearsed a terrible sentence over and over and still wasn't ready to say it. Her apartment felt too quiet. No TV, no kettle hissing, not even the soft background noise of Lily's toys. Just stillness. She sat down slowly on the couch and folded her hands in her lap. I sat across from her, but every muscle in me tightened like I was bracing for impact. "Emily," she said, and the way my name quivered in her voice made my stomach twist. "There's something I need to tell you. I should have told you a long time ago." My first thought was that something had changed with her diagnosis. Something terminal. Something soon. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it back, shaking her head as if physical comfort would break her resolve. "It's about Lily," she said. Those 4 words hit harder than any medical news could have. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I waited, because what else could I do? Mia lifted her eyes to mine, red-rimmed, terrified, guilty in a way that didn't make sense yet, and whispered, "Jason is her biological father." For a moment it didn't feel real. It was like my brain refused to process the sound of the words. My heartbeat slowed so suddenly it hurt. I stared at her, absolutely convinced I had misheard. But Mia kept talking, and the truth poured out with a speed that suggested she feared she'd lose her courage if she stopped. She told me about Hannah, a girl Jason had been seeing casually before he and I met. She told me they'd hooked up a handful of times, that it didn't mean anything, that Jason swore it was over long before he and I got engaged, and then she said it. The last time they slept together was the week before our wedding. I felt something inside me rupture, a silent, internal tearing. I remember pressing my fingers into the couch cushion just to anchor myself to the room. Mia went on. Hannah found out she was pregnant. She told Jason he panicked. He insisted the baby wasn't his. He refused a test, refused responsibility, refused everything. And when the baby was born and Hannah made it clear she wanted out, Mia stepped in. To protect everyone, she said. Protect everyone. Everyone except me. She claimed she did it so Lily wouldn't end up in foster care, so Jason wouldn't ruin his marriage before it began, so our family wouldn't tear itself apart scandal by scandal. She swore she never wanted to hurt me. She said she thought the truth could stay buried forever. I sat there in disbelief, nausea crawling up my throat. I asked her, very quietly, why now? Why tear my life open after years of silence? She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Because I'm getting worse, she said. And I don't know how much time I have left. I can't go without telling you. The secret is killing me. Her words felt like a knife twisting deeper with every breath. I wanted to scream, cry, run, throw something. Instead, I sat absolutely still, because stillness was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. She reached for me then, saying, please, Emily, don't hate Lily. She's innocent. None of this is her fault. And she was right. I didn't hate Lily. But suddenly I didn't know how to breathe around the truth. I didn't know how to reconcile the child I loved with the betrayal that created her. When I finally stood to leave, Mia looked at me with such raw fear that for a second I pitied her. But the pity was drowned by the tidal wave of betrayal. I walked out without looking back. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember traffic lights, or turns, or even parking. I just remember walking into our house and seeing Jason standing at the stove, stirring pasta sauce like it was any ordinary day. He turned, smiled, and said, hey babe, you're home early. And I stared at him, realizing the man I married had been able to look me in the eyes for years, while hiding something that changed everything about our life. That was the moment the ground beneath our marriage finally gave way. I confronted Jason that night. I remember standing in the kitchen, hands trembling, staring at him as if the man I married had become a stranger overnight. My voice didn't waver, even though every part of me wanted to scream. Is it true? I asked, and the silence that followed was worse than any answer. Jason's face didn't change at first. He blinked slowly like he was trying to buy time to weigh his words. Then he spoke, denying everything. At first, it was small. Mia's confused. Then bigger. Hannah slept around. You're misunderstanding the situation. His tone was casual, almost condescending, like he was correcting a minor factual error. The more he denied it, the colder my heart became. Years of trust, of shared plans, of late-night conversations, of believing in him, all seemed to vanish in a single breath. Finally, I told him bluntly, we're doing a DNA test, now, or I leave tonight. I don't think he fully expected me to mean it. He nodded slowly, a tight smile, like a man who was agreeing to a procedure he didn't want. The air in the house felt thick, heavy. Lily was asleep in her room. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Not yet. Every step I took toward justice felt like a betrayal of the innocent child I had helped raise. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. I didn't even open the envelope at first. I just held it, shaking, staring at the numbers through the paper as if squinting harder would make the truth vanish. But when I finally looked, the result was undeniable. 99.8% probability. Jason was Lily's father. He sat down on the couch across from me, eyes wide, trying to process what had just been confirmed. He started talking immediately, stumbling over words, trying to apologize, trying to explain. I never cheated after we were married, he said, voice tight. It was a drunk mistake. I didn't know it would happen. I didn't know she was pregnant. I swear it won't happen again. And then came the words that pierced deeper than any confession could. We can still be a family. You don't have to leave. We can raise her together. I stared at him in disbelief. A family? After years of deceit? After hiding a child from me while we built a life together? How could he speak of family when every word he said reminded me of the betrayal? He begged me to adopt Lily with him, to be her mother, to help him make things right. He painted a picture of a future where we were all a happy, cohesive unit, him, me, and Lily, ignoring the foundation of lies that the entire story rested upon. I felt nauseated. I wanted to scream, to throw the envelope across the room, to shake him until he understood the depth of what he had done. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling the floor fall out beneath me. That night, I packed a bag. I kissed Lily on the forehead as she slept, feeling her warmth and innocence, and my heart shattered, knowing that the very hands I had raised her with were stained with betrayal. I couldn't be a mother to her under these circumstances. I couldn't see a way past the deceit. I left the house and didn't look back. I stayed with my sister Laura, who took one look at me and didn't ask questions. She just gave me tea, blankets, and a safe space to feel all the emotions I was trying to swallow. Rage, sadness, confusion, grief, disgust, relief, all tangled together in knots I couldn't untangle. Jason called, texted, begged, promised therapy, honesty, anything to convince me to stay. But he never acknowledged the core truth. He had lied for years, and that lie had reshaped my life without my consent. The child I loved, who had become the center of our lives, was a living reminder of the deception, and he expected me to pretend it didn't matter. For the first time, I realized that sometimes love isn't enough to fix the damage done by lies, and sometimes walking away is the only path to survive. I had been staying with my sister Laura for a week when the calls and messages started coming. Not just from Jason, though he called constantly, but from his parents, who seemed to have been waiting for me to break under the weight of guilt. Their texts arrived one after another, piling up in my phone. "You can't abandon a child who depends on you. You're her mother now, Emily, and you have responsibilities. Jason made a mistake, but families survive things like this." Every message carried that familiar undertone, the one that implied I was selfish, cruel, and heartless for even thinking of leaving. I blocked their numbers after the 5th round of messages in a single afternoon. They didn't get it, they never would. They couldn't understand that the problem wasn't Lily. It was that every time I looked at her, I saw the man who had betrayed me, hiding the truth while asking me to pretend it didn't matter. Every smile she flashed at me, every hug she gave, carried the weight of a secret I had only just discovered, a secret that made the life I built with Jason a lie. Laura sat me down that night with mugs of tea steaming between us, and she said the one thing that actually made sense in the middle of all the chaos. "You have to save yourself first, Emily. Nobody else can do that for you." I nodded, but the feeling of guilt was relentless. I thought of Lily, innocent and trusting, unaware of the deception that had shaped the first years of her life. How could I walk away from her? How could I leave her with a father who had lied so fundamentally, yet still expected me to embrace a family that no longer existed? Jason called that night. I didn't answer. His voicemail was full of the kind of pleading you see in movies, the kind that's supposed to make you forgive and forget. "Emily, I know I messed up. I know I lied, but we can fix this. We can be a family. Please don't do this." His voice cracked in the exact places designed to tug at my heart, and for a second I thought about going back. Maybe I could forgive him. Maybe I could try to convince myself that raising Lily as a family was possible. But then I remembered the years of lies, the careful way he hid the truth, the calm, casual way he had lived beside me while knowing he had fathered a child without my knowledge. I remembered Mia's face, the tremor in her hands as she admitted the secret, the way she cried because she couldn't carry it any longer. And I realized something. Nothing he said now could erase that. The pressure from the family continued. Calls, messages, even emails from distant relatives who had heard from Mia. "Emily, this is Lily's home. She has a right to her family. Don't abandon her." I felt suffocated, trapped in a web I didn't weave, expected to carry responsibilities I never agreed to, judged for refusing to compromise my own boundaries for everyone else's sense of morality. Every time I thought I had made peace with leaving, another wave of pressure hit. They framed my decision as selfishness, as betrayal, as abandonment. They didn't seem to realize that staying would mean sacrificing my own well-being, forcing myself to accept a life built on deception, pretending I could love a child that existed as a living reminder of my husband's ultimate betrayal. Laura kept reminding me that guilt isn't a compass. It's a weapon. And she was right. I knew she was right. But guilt is sticky, invasive, and relentless, especially when the world expects you to bend under it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell at everyone to leave me alone. Instead, I sat in her living room, staring at the floor, wondering if anyone would ever understand why I couldn't go back, why no amount of promises, apologies, or moral arguments could convince me to stay. At that moment, I realized that the life I had known, one with Jason, with Lily, with the illusion of a happy family, was over. And I also realized that the hardest thing wasn't leaving him, but leaving the child I had already learned to love, a child whose life had been shaped by deception and whose innocence now weighed on me with a heaviness I wasn't sure I could bear. I didn't have answers. I didn't have closure, but I had clarity. I could not stay. And that, as Laura kept reminding me, was enough to start rebuilding the pieces of myself. The nights were the hardest. After I left Jason, I would lie awake in Laura's guest room, staring at the ceiling, and my thoughts would always spiral back to Lily. I could see her small, chubby hands, her wide eyes looking up at me in trust, and my chest ached. She didn't know. She couldn't know. And yet, she was the center of everything that had gone wrong. And the center of everything I still cared about. I had loved Lily from the first day she came into our lives. I had celebrated her first steps, clapped loudly for her little milestones, and comforted her when she cried at night. I had read to her, held her in my arms, and made her laugh. And now, thinking about stepping away from her filled me with guilt so raw, it made me physically sick. She didn't ask for any of this. She didn't ask to be born. She didn't ask to be a part of a lie. And yet, somehow, my leaving her felt like the cruelest betrayal. But the truth I couldn't ignore was just as heavy. I could not be Lily's mother in good faith. Every time I looked at her, I would see Jason. I would see the man who lied, who hid her existence, who asked me to accept her while pretending that the betrayal that created her didn't matter. I realized that if I tried to force myself into the role of a loving mother, I would resent her. It wouldn't be fair to Lily to live with the shadow of that resentment, even if it was buried deep. People kept telling me, "You're her mother now. You can't abandon her." And I wanted to scream back, "I never asked for this." But the words felt hollow when spoken to those who had never experienced betrayal on this scale. They couldn't understand that staying wouldn't make me a hero. Staying would make me complicit in my own erasure, sacrificing my boundaries, my mental health, my sense of self. All for a child I already loved but could not parent without seeing the man who destroyed my trust in every glance, every smile. And yet, love doesn't work in straight lines. I loved Lily enough to want what was best for her, even if that meant stepping away. I hated myself for it, but I knew that staying for her sake, in the end, would hurt her more than leaving. She deserved someone whose love wasn't tainted by betrayal, someone whose patience and care were unconditional because they weren't intertwined with heartbreak and distrust. I couldn't be that person. Not now, not ever, not for Lily. I had nightmares about her. I saw her crying, looking for me, asking why I had left, and I woke in a cold sweat, screaming silently in the dark. And then I would remind myself, she would still have Jason. She would still have family willing to care for her. Mia had chosen us to raise her because she wanted her to be loved, and even in my absence, that love would continue. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would exist. That was something. At the same time, I was terrified of what Jason would do. Would he manipulate her against me? Would he tell her lies to make me seem cruel? I hated the idea of my child, my Lily, growing up with half-truths, without knowing why I had walked away. And yet, I also knew that remaining would destroy me in ways I couldn't come back from. I had to accept that protecting myself was as important as protecting her. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, that this wasn't about me abandoning her. I wanted them to understand that stepping away was an act of love in its own strange, broken way. But I knew no one would. Everyone expected me to forgive, to step up, to pretend nothing happened. And I couldn't. I wasn't sure I could ever be that person. So I stayed silent. And I left. And every night, I held on to the hope that Lily would be okay. That somehow, she would grow up, surrounded by love. And that one day, maybe, she'd understand that my leaving didn't mean I stopped loving her. It just meant I couldn't be the mother she deserved. And in that hope, fragile as it was, I found the only thread of peace I could grasp in the wreckage of my life. The decision didn't come in a moment of clarity or cinematic realization. It came in layers, like peeling away skin from raw wounds. Every call from Jason, every message from his parents, every plea from distant relatives who had heard the story and felt entitled to judge me, chipped away at whatever fragile balance I was trying to maintain. And yet, through it all, I knew one thing. I couldn't stay. Not with Jason. Not with Lily, at least not in the way they expected. I contacted a lawyer. Not because I wanted to fight, but because I needed clarity. I needed someone to tell me what I had the right to do. I needed someone to remind me that my body, my mind, and my life weren't property that anyone else could claim. The lawyer, patient and professional, explained the realities: custody, visitation, responsibilities, and legal obligations. She was careful not to sway me in any direction, just laying out facts. And the more she explained, the more solid my resolve became. I could leave Jason. I could leave the house we shared, the life we had built, and even the role of mother I had been thrust into without consent. I could survive. But leaving wasn't the end of the storm. It never is. Jason called almost immediately after I filed the initial paperwork. I didn't answer. His voicemail was heavy with emotion. Emily, I know I made a mistake. I know I lied, and I'm sorry. But please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can raise her together. Please don't leave me. Don't leave your family. Family. The word stabbed like a knife. What family was he talking about? The family that had conspired to hide the truth from me? The family that now demanded I stay, guilt as leverage, morality as a leash? The family whose lies had nearly destroyed me? No, that wasn't my family. Not anymore. I stayed with Laura that night, sitting at her kitchen table long after midnight. I didn't cry. I was past that stage. Instead, I thought about Lily, about Jason, about the life I had built on illusions, and I realized leaving isn't betrayal. Staying would be betrayal. Of myself, of my needs, of my right to heal. And yet the hardest part wasn't leaving Jason. It wasn't even leaving Lily, though that tore at me in ways words can't capture. The hardest part was imagining the judgment, the condemnation, the endless chorus of voices telling me I was selfish, that I was cruel, that I was failing a child who hadn't asked to exist. But I couldn't live my life according to other people's moral imperatives. I had to prioritize my survival, my sanity, my boundaries. That was the only way I could ever hope to rebuild. The next day, I told Jason my decision. He begged. He cried. He promised therapy, honesty, everything. I listened, nodding, because I had learned that sometimes listening doesn't mean agreeing. I told him simply, I can't be part of this family anymore. I can't raise Lily as my child. I have to go. He looked like someone had shoved a knife into his chest. And in that moment, I felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Only the weight of reality settling on both of us. Years of lies, years of love, years of assumed life. All of it reduced to a single sentence. I can't stay. I packed the last of my things and left our home. Not in anger, not in rage, but in quiet determination. For the first time in weeks, I felt a measure of control. For the first time, I understood that leaving wasn't just about escaping betrayal, it was about choosing myself. Walking away didn't erase the past. It didn't make Jason's lies disappear. It didn't fix the shattered trust or the complicated love I still felt for Lily. But it was mine. For the first time, the decision was entirely mine. And that, I realized, was the only thing I could control in a life that had been defined for me by other people's secrets. The weeks after leaving Jason were a blur of boxes, phone calls I didn't answer, and nights where silence was the only thing keeping me from unraveling completely. Laura was a constant anchor, her apartment a sanctuary from the storm of expectation, blame, and judgment that rained down from Jason's family and even distant relatives. I hadn't realized how exhausting it could be just to exist when everyone else's morality is weighed against you. Every text, every email, every "are you sure?" felt like another chain trying to pull me back into a life I had no desire to return to. I tried to focus on myself, on rebuilding the parts of me that had been hollowed out by betrayal. Therapy helped, though it was slow, frustrating work. Each session was like peeling layers off an onion, layers of self-doubt, layers of guilt, layers of love I couldn't control. I talked about Jason, about Lily, about the family who had tried to pressure me into a life that belonged to someone else. I cried in ways I hadn't cried since the first nights after Mia's confession. And with each session, with each honest conversation, I started to understand walking away wasn't selfish, it was survival. But then there was Lily. She lingered in my mind constantly, the weight of her innocence a sharp, relentless ache. I worried about how she would remember me, how she would process my absence as she grew older. Would she be told the truth? Would she know why I left, or would she inherit the resentment and secrecy I had tried so hard to escape? These questions kept me awake at night, tangled in a web of what-ifs that no one could answer. I thought of Jason, too. Not as the man I once loved, but as someone whose choices had consequences far beyond his own life. I hated him and pitied him in equal measure. I hated the deceit, the lies, the way he had expected me to carry the weight of a child that was his and not mine. And yet, I knew that hatred alone wouldn't change the past or protect Lily. I allowed myself one phone call with Mia. She was weaker than I had ever seen her, her voice trembling over the line as she spoke about her own regrets, about the child she had tried to protect, about the family she had unintentionally hurt. I forgave her in that moment, not because the past was okay, but because holding on to anger would have destroyed me faster than leaving Jason ever could. In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. I focused on my work, on my friendships, on my own growth. I refused to answer Jason's calls most days, blocked numbers, ignored emails. Slowly, I started to feel the space around me fill with something other than tension. Breath, freedom, the quiet knowledge that my decisions were mine and mine alone. The hardest truth, though, was accepting that love and responsibility are not the same thing. I loved Lily. and I always would. But I could not parent her without compromising my own survival, and I realized that sometimes leaving is not an act of cruelty, but an act of preservation. For both the adult who must live with betrayal, and for the child who deserves a mother whose love isn't bound to pain and resentment, I have no easy ending to this story. There's no fairy tale resolution, where everything is fixed, where Jason apologizes and everyone hugs it out. Instead, there's the quiet aftermath, the slow rebuilding of a life fractured by lies. There's therapy, friends who understand without judgment, and nights where I sleep without imagining the worst. There's freedom. And most importantly, there's the knowledge that I made a choice, however painful, that belonged only to me. I left a life built on lies, a marriage poisoned before it began, and a child I loved but could not mother. And in that choice, harsh, unforgiving, but honest, I finally found a measure of peace. This story really makes you think about what it means to be a parent and what it means to forgive. She loved the child, but couldn't stay with the source of the betrayal. And honestly, that's understandable. Walking away doesn't make her a bad person. I don't think anyone could judge her decision to leave. Sometimes protecting yourself is the most loving thing you can do.